So anyway, you might have to bear with me for a second. Let's just see how that works. Okay. You can see this?
Current occupation.
All right. You can still see this? Regular?
We can see it.
Okay. Shall I begin? All right. Hello, everyone. If you don't know me, I'm Dr. Andrew Gilbert, teach in the department, and was invited to do something which I actually love doing because I'll give you a little bit of background. When it comes to me and kind of academic, professional, and public writing, I was trained a little bit in how to do this back when I was doing my PhD at the University of Chicago. And there they have this writing program, which I think is somewhat similar to the one that's just gotten off the ground at U of T or UTM campus, in which for decades they've been doing research on what counts as good writing, basically. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. But we could then get trained in how to kind of understand it and then how to teach it. And I remember just feeling, after I'd gone through the training and taught the first course in academic and professional writing while still a PhD student, how much I wished I had had it as an undergraduate. So anyway, I got really nailed on my writing when I was an undergraduate and even into my MA program. So I'm always a fan of doing this. So I'm just gonna see here. So the first thing here, even before we get to this text, is that this is gonna be maybe more detailed than you expected, or kind of deeper than maybe you expected. I would recommend taking notes, even though there's this PowerPoint here, which I will make available later. I don't know if any of your professors have ever made this observation or you have found it yourself, but the note-taking process is actually a way that we learn and we process information and how it sticks in our head and makes sense to us. And so even though I'm happy to provide the PowerPoint later, I would still recommend that you take some notes as you go along, just to kind of benefit from the possibilities of note-taking. Okay, so that's just to say, I will share this PowerPoint later, so you can know that as you take your notes, but I don't think it should be a replacement for taking notes. And also, I don't know who's going to be doing any other moderation, whether it's Lydia or Shahani, but I don't know if people have questions or you'd like me to slow down. You can put it in the chat and maybe one of you can let me know in case I don't see it, or interject. You will not be, this isn't for me, this is for you guys. So you won't be offending me if you interject at any point with a question or a clarification. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to tell you is that I'm not teaching you, this isn't really designed to teach you about how to write. Rather, this is about tips and ways in which you can diagnose your own writing by asking questions about your texts that your readers, i.e. your teachers, fellow students, colleagues, will be asking when they are evaluating your writing, right? So this isn't about how to write, this is about how to diagnose your own writing so that it has the qualities that you want it to have. And so we call it kind of reader oriented. We approach this from the point of view of how readers read and how to know what readers want when they are reading. And this has one significant advantage. It allows us to diagnose what is or may be wrong with our writing when it appears completely clear to us, right? Because this is one of those things, I've experienced it. I'm sure you've experienced in your writing. You write something, it makes total sense to you, and then you might get back a comment like unclear, incoherent, where's the point? And it's all in your head. It makes perfect sense. So how do you diagnose the difference between how you read your writing and how somebody else does? And part of what we're going to do today is talk about how to do that. So starting points, I proceed from a few key assumptions. 1, you want your writing to be clear. 2, you want it to be coherent. And 3, you want it to be persuasive. You want people to care and maybe even share your conclusions. And luckily, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, people have done research and know what native speakers of English consider clear, coherent, and persuasive. So this is a kind of researched, informed set of ideas about how to diagnose your writing. And so what I'll pass along today is based on that research. So in this kind of seminar, discussion, workshop, we'll go over the following topics. Actions and verbs, subject-verb cores and connectors, balancing old and new information, the work of paragraphs, elements of persuasion, and a few kind of observations about writing for the public. Now, some of this I think is more important than other aspects. And so I'll be keeping an eye on the clock here. And if I think we might be running out of time, I might skip or not spend as much time on some of this as on others, because I think some of it, especially the work of paragraphs and elements of persuasion, are pretty important. But I actually think that we're going to have time to cover it all. So again, we're getting, I don't know if what you were expecting, but we're getting like deep. We're getting into kind of like the mechanics of writing, and hopefully that's what you were signed up for, because that's what we are going to do. Okay, so actions and verbs. And you can look at a couple of, so here's 2 ways of writing the same thing, right? So let's look at the first one. The standardization of an index for the measurement of option risk premiums has made quantification of investor response as a function of currency fluctuation possible. That's a mouthful. Here's another way of writing it. Now that an index has been standardized to measure the risk premium of options, we can quantify how investors respond to currency fluctuations. Now, if you were to take a moment and to read those, and both read them and then read them out loud, you would see that there's a big difference. And the difference is how action and verbs are kind of appear in each sentence. So readers of English use verbs to understand the world in terms of actions. Actions are not the same as verbs. Actions can be in verbs, but also in adverbs, in adjectives, and in nouns. So here are 3 examples of that, right? So you have Giuliani threatened the brokers, right? There is a verb. Giuliani issued a threat against the brokers. That is, a noun. He gave a speech threatening the brokers. He spoke threateningly about the brokers. So you can see there's action in each of those, not necessarily, however, in verb. So usually to identify the actions in a sentence, we find words that could end in ing. So here's a sample sentence. Staff evaluation of the program will be conducted soon in order to achieve enhanced efficiency in client servicing. What are the actions? Well, we have the words on the page and actions in the world. So the words on the page are evaluation. So we have evaluating is the action. Will be conducted, conducting, to achieve, achieving, enhanced, enhancing, servicing, servicing. So you can see that those are the actions in the world that the words on the page refer to. Now, what are the most important actions going on in the world which the sentence describes? Probably evaluating and servicing. Note that these actions are expressed in nouns, evaluation and servicing. So what happens to the effectiveness of the sentence if we change the kind of word that expresses those actions? That is, instead of expressing them as nouns, we express them as verbs. So here's that earlier sentence rewritten to express the most important actions as verbs and not nouns. The staff will soon evaluate the program so that they can serve their clients more efficiently. So the point here, as you will see, is that readers look for actions in verbs, so that you should express your essential actions in verbs. If the verb in a text consistently shows significant actions, the foundation is strong and the style is likely to be considered clear. If the verbs consistently show insignificant or abstract actions, like occurring or existing, the foundation is weak and the style is likely to be considered unclear. If the verbs show no action at all, you're building on basically nothing. In fact, in strong writing, the verbs alone will tell the reader the crucial actions. So the kind of takeaway point here is that readers, especially of English, look for action in verbs, and they're looking for the actions that you put into verbs, they're going to interpret as the most important thing about what they're reading. So you always want to make sure that your most important, significant actions are in verb form. If you do that, then the writing will come across as clear. So here you can see, again, these are some examples. In these passages, the verbs are underlined and the actions are in italics. In the first passage, the verbs do not express important actions, but in the second one, they do. So you can just kind of get a see it, and I'll just read through this. Here's the one where, the applicability of the provisions on prohibition against interlocks in the Act and regulations depends almost entirely on the definition of whether, I can't even see my whole thing here, I'm sorry. I've got my little, there we go, of whether X is a band for BHCA purposes. So you can see there that the verb is depends, but the important action is applicability, prohibition, definition. So if you rewrite it, the Act and regulations will prohibit interlocks if BHCA defines X as a bank. So hopefully you see the difference in those, and hopefully you will see, or it feels like, the second one is clearer to you. And I won't go through and read out loud the second one. You can read it yourself. But again, you can see, hopefully, it will take a moment, I'll be silent, and you should just read it. And hopefully the second one reads clearer than the first one. And this is why, because the verbs are, the important actions are expressed as verbs. I should mention that all of the examples that I use here are taken from real existing examples. Nobody made this stuff up. You might think like, how could this sentence actually exist in the world? It's so impenetrable or, hard to understand. And yet this is part of the point of the exercise, is that these do exist in the world. And there are ways to correct them. Okay. So the first point there that we talked about is about, which is about kind of clarity in writing, is about putting the important actions into verb form. And when you do that, it gives the feeling that the prose is clear and easily understood. So here is then a kind of add-on effect. And this might be something that some of you have encountered if you've ever taken anything, maybe even back in high school, about writing, which is the challenge of nominalizations, which is when you turn a verb or an adjective into a noun. And here's some examples, right? So the verb is to investigate. The nominalization is investigation. Discover, discovery. Perform, performance, and so on. Nominalizations are not bad in and of themselves, but they are bad when you want readers to understand an action. Readers look for actions in verbs, And if you put action in a nominalization, it'll be harder for them to recognize that. So again, that's just to kind of like tie off that end. When you are diagnosing some of your own writing and you want to make sure that it's going to come across as clear and easy to understand, and especially that the points you're making are clear, one way you can do that is to look at your own writing, look at your paragraph or your sentence even, and ask yourself, is the important information being expressed as a verb, or is it being expressed as a nominalization, an adverb, a noun? And then if you can see it is being expressed as a verb, you're good to go. If it's not, then you have a way to go about diagnosing and changing that part of your writing. And you can play around with this. You can ask yourself, well, what is the most important action in this sentence or paragraph? I think it might be this and this. So how would it look if I change it around and express them as verbs versus other ways? And hopefully you will see that there is clarity there. So that's the first kind of general point, right? Actions, most important actions should be expressed in verb form, and that will give the readers of your writing the experience or feeling that it is clear. Here now we're transitioning to a second point on subject-verb cores and the co-position. And co here stands for connectors and orienters. Again, this is the nitty-gritty of writing here. I don't know if it's what you were expecting, but that's kind of I promise you, if you even take up half of these things, your writing will improve dramatically. Okay. So in English sentences, the subject-verb relationship is the basis on which we process everything else. Readers cannot easily read much else in the sentence before they establish the fundamental subject-verb relationship, and we'll call that the core. Again, this is a point which some of you may have heard before. It's worth repeating because it's still a challenge in lots of writing. Readers want the subject and the verb to be close together, and they want them early in the sentence. So here are some examples, right? This surprising recovery in the face of an abrupt slowing of retail sales in the consumer durable goods sector, with the consequent near panic of inventory reductions among manufacturers, continued in the fourth quarter. And then you could see how immediately it's changed. This surprising recovery continued into the fourth quarter in the face of an abrupt slowing of retail sales, and so on and so forth. So you can see, right, in the first example, the subject, which is that giant long text that precedes the verb comes so much later. In the second example, it comes right there at the beginning. The first sentence is confusing because it contains what we call a core violation, where the subject and the verb are so far apart. The second sentence is clearer because it has what we call a closed core. The subject-verb core is close together and close to the beginning of the sentence. So here's an example where you guys can try this on your own. It's called Cores and the 10-second edit. So again, something you can do to your own writing, but maybe you want to pick one of these three and try and rewrite it to improve it on this issue of the core. So I'm just going to be silent for a moment, and maybe you can pick one and see how you would transform it. And apologies if you hear my children or my cat in the background. They may be a little bit noisy. So you can see in all three of these, hopefully you chose one and tried to do it, is that you could take the bit at the very end of each one of these sentences and just rearrange it and place it at the beginning. So if we take C there, you could easily say, our understanding of organizational behaviors are clarified by knowledge of institutional patterns of decision-making, political alliances, but we have our subject, which is our understanding of organizational behaviors, and then we have our verb with clarifies. Similar about, obtaining, which comes at the very end of that second example, and our targets in this phase are the member firms, individuals, or groups designated to choose an exchange. So hopefully you can see how that improves kind of the clarity and the understanding. So that CO core are often preceded. Now we're going to go to the second part of this. So if we have the core, that subject verb core, they're often preceded by what we'll call connectors and orienters. We'll call this the CO or co. And if it is in a sentence, it comes before the core. Hence the kind of little formula there, CO plus core. A single sentence can have more than one CO core structure, but it may not have a CO, but it will always have a core. So in other words, you'll always have the verb subject core. You may not have an orienter or a connector, but we often have them. And why do we use them? We use them to position, we use that position to give readers orienting information and to connect ideas logically. Now, what in the world do I mean by this? Well, here we go. Orienters give background information. To be effective as background, they must give familiar information, something the reader can quickly grasp and can use to understand the rest of the sentence. Often orienters show time or place, but they can also show purpose, condition, source, any information that is easy to understand quickly and will help the reader understand the rest of the sentence. Now, you probably do this anyway in your writing, but here's a way, again, to think about how your writing comes across to readers. So you may want to ask yourself, have I oriented the reader so they can understand what I'm talking about? So does place matter? If it does, to orient the reader, then you would want to say something like, in both London and Geneva. Does time matter? Does the source? Or does the purpose? So these are all things that, again, help to produce what we think of as clear and coherent writing. Now, orienters can go wrong if the reader does not know what you're referring to and if they're too complex. If it's the latter case, you should use another sentence. So here are some examples. Our commercials clearly convey that our product has more than one appeal because a potato side dish is by its nature convenient. Given this, we feel we can proceed to the next question. Obviously, the point is, given what? The clear conveyance, more than one appeal, the side dish is by its nature convenient, right? There's just that attempt to orient the reader fails in this case. Here's another one. Despite the difficulty of explicitly solving the complete dynamic model and to extract more explicit analytic results from the solution of the system, economists must often rely on some sort of simplifying dynamic. So the example there is that that's just too complex. Your average reader would not know what that refers to. So again, these are ways in which orienters can fail to do their work of orienting the reader, something that they can grasp quickly and helps them to understand what's going on. So that's orienters. And then the other side of that that CO, are connectors. Some connectors do nothing more than link your information together. Words like and, or, nor, moreover, in addition. But other connectors provide an even more important service. They express a logical relationship between ideas. They tell us why, how, when, whether, if. So cores are discrete thoughts or facts, but connectors turn them into meaningful arguments. So here's some examples. There's your connectors, which are contrast connectors. However, nevertheless, although, yet, on the contrary, that does that work of contrasting, of helping to develop your sentence into something meaningful. And there's a bunch of other examples there. Purpose, cause and effect. Again, this is all stuff I think that's familiar, but this is to give you a kind of language in which you can understand how sentences work the way that they work and how to make them work in your favor. Connectors are important because they build the logical backbone of your explanation or argument. If your connectors are vague or missing, your entire text will seem rambling, disjointed, impenetrable, or irrelevant. And I can tell you, as someone who reads student writing often, that this is something that happens from time to time. The connectors or the orienters are either unclear, vague, and or I don't understand what the relationship is between sentences, right? So a connector helps to show what the relationship is between different parts of a paragraph or even a sentence. So connectors are important because they build that logical backbone. Sometimes connectors go wrong when they're vague. And here's some examples of vague connectors. And what we mean by vague here is that there is another connector which would more clearly indicate what you want to communicate. So in other words, due to might be better replaced with because. Contingent upon might be better replaced with if, when, or if not. Anyway, you might think that these are clear. I use some of these from time to time, but the point here is that some readers might come across that and think, well, basically what you end up doing is that you are leaving open to interpretation something that you don't want left open to interpretation. And so you can ask yourself, is my connector clearly expressing the logical connection that I would like to have it express? Is there a better word for it? And then you can go through and figure that out. This is just, I'm not going to spend much time here. This is just when I was doing this training on academic writing, and this was a bugaboo of the trainers, the connector with, because they called it the connector with 1,000 faces. When we use it to link simple, concrete nouns together, its meaning is clear. We had a 3-hour meeting with our lawyer. But with is often used to connect actions hiding in nouns. And when it does that, it tries to do the work of a heavy-duty connector, and they give you some examples there. And things that might be better, like, would although be better, would because be better, and then at that last example, they're just like, what in the world does this even mean? So don't spend too much time on that. We'll get this PowerPoint to you later, but with is just one of those potentially challenging ones. So to summarize a bit at this point, in passages that seem complex and cumbersome, underline the number of words that appear before the first subject-verb core. If you have underlined more than half the sentence, then that's a candidate for revision. The fix is to put a complete subject-verb core at or near the beginning of the sentence. So again, this is the kind of self-diagnostic, right? If you're looking at your own writing and you're reading it and you're saying, this thing feels or reads cumbersome, this is one way to figure out if this is one of the reasons why and how to fix it. Another thing you can do is to find passages that make an argument or analyze complex information and circle the connectors. Find words like if then, because, therefore. Readers will predictably have trouble following your argument if there aren't many connectors, or if the connectors are too diluted to signal a precise logical relationship. So the fix is that if actions are hiding in nominalizations, unpack them into subject-verb cores. Then link the new cores with significant connectors that express a logical relationship. And again, here's some examples. So at this point, right, we've talked about clarity that is produced by putting your most important actions into verb form. And we've talked about the way to produce clarity and understanding by making sure that your subject-verb core is close together and comes towards the beginning of a sentence, and that you have those important orienters or connectors involved that help to guide a reader to understand the meaning and the logic of what you're trying to write. So we've talked about actions and verbs, and we've talked about this subject verb core and the importance of those connectors and orienters, and some places where you might go wrong or could improve and ways to improve it. Have any questions come up yet? I know this is kind of going pretty quickly and it's a lot of information, but I'm going to assume if nothing's happened yet, then looking at Lydia's face, she doesn't look like there's anything. Okay, so we'll continue then. This is again, something you might have heard before. It's a pretty simple point, but it's an important one. And here's an example. People like them, but they're rather strange. They're rather strange, but people like them. Now, if you just listen to somebody say that, you would and ask yourself, what's the point being made? Or which of those two statements is the important one that they're trying to convey? It will really depend on whether the information comes at the beginning or the end, right? So the first one, people like them, but they're rather strange. The point seems to be they're rather strange. But if you put it the other way around, they're rather strange, but people like them. The stress is on the second part, right? People like them. Here's a stock fund that stresses its success. The record of the past is not necessarily indicative of future results, but from its inception, the Acme Fund has consistently outperformed all the major market indexes. And then here's another example of a researcher giving a misleading impression about which characteristics are most critical. Patients, families, and health workers are more likely to withhold antibiotic therapy for patients with cancer and decreased mental status, or who were bedridden, in pain, or married. So here's the basic point. If you want readers to remember something, place it at the end of the sentence. And we're calling this the stress position. This has to do with the expected information flow in a text. Some old information first, then some new information, and so on. The structure of information flow dictates that the most important information come in the stress position. This principle is particularly important when your important information is in the form of numbers, or numbers combined with dates, names, places, etc. Put at the beginning of the sentence the relative consonants. Put at the beginning of the sentence those things that are relatively constant, particularly if they are not complex. This makes natural orienters, repeated dates, places, categories. But put at the end of the sentence the crucial information you want your readers to remember. So again, this is about old information before new information. And usually the new information is the stuff that is the most important, the thing you want the reader to remember. And so you put it at the end of the sentence. So that was just a simple point, and we're moving actually on to a new section, but I just want, old before new. Again, it's the same. It's a similar kind of observation about those, orienters, right? You want to orient your reader with something that they're familiar with before you introduce them to something that's new. This helps them in the kind of in the flow of things to take the new information. All right. And now we're getting to something that I think is probably one of the most important kind of things in this whole session, which is really the work of paragraphs. So what we've been talking about up until this point is what we might think of as sentence level kinds of ways to make your writing clearer so that readers will see it and experience it as clear. Now we're moving on to a point about coherence. So what is coherence? Coherence is setting expectations for readers and then fulfilling those expectations. So if you've ever had anyone tell you, or you yourself have had the experience of feeling like this thing you're reading is not coherent, it doesn't seem to hang together. Part of the reason that it doesn't is because either the writer raised some expectations about what to expect and then didn't fulfill them, or they gave you stuff that they didn't tell you to anticipate. And so you're just feeling like, this doesn't hang together, this doesn't fit. So again, what is coherence? It's setting expectations for readers and fulfilling those expectations. So the reader takes the beginning of any unit of writing, whether that is the beginning of a whole book or even the beginning of a paragraph, as the conceptual basis for understanding the rest of the unit. So in this case, they look at the beginning of the book as to how they should understand the rest of the book. And even at the level of the paragraph, they look at the beginning of the paragraph to understand the rest of the paragraph. So this opening position is therefore extremely important. We can call it the issue position. It controls the reader's sense of the coherence of the writing. Usually, the issue controls the reader's understanding by offering the fundamental ideas which the reader can use to make sense of the information that follows. Right? So if you've ever heard a teacher or you yourself conceptualized as a piece of writing as having a kind of, the introduction gives a roadmap, right? It tells the reader, this is what to expect. These are the terms that are going to be important for you to think about. This is the argument that I'm going to be making, and here's how I'm going to make it. You're providing that roadmap is setting expectations, and that happens at the beginning. And then hopefully you fulfill those expectations in the rest of the writing, and readers will experience it as coherent. So, as she reads, the reader will look to interpret everything in relationship to that initial conceptual basis. If she can make sense of the discussion from this basis, the writing will feel coherent. If she cannot, the writing will seem disorganized or fuzzy or illogical, right? So you can see we're already introducing some vocabulary here. So the issue position, or thinking about issue and discussion as a structure for a piece of writing, that's kind of fixed. And what they mean by fixed, or what I mean by fixed here, is this is what we've all been socialized, at least those of us socialized into, the English language, we've been socialized into expecting this when we read something, that we're going to be introduced to a set of issues, and then that's going to be followed by a discussion of those issues. And that's something we can't mess with, right? That is socially out there. It's a norm and we can't mess with it, but we can use it, right? So the issue position controls the way that readers perceive coherence, whether you realize it or not, or want it to or not. You cannot change the way readers read issue positions, but you can make use of it. So it's interesting to think about this in terms of what readers do to the writing when they read it. Readers impose issue positions on all levels of discourse or units. They create expectations based on anything they perceive as a beginning. The perceived beginning of a text is thus the issue position of the text. So if you don't put your issues in the beginning, the readers will impose on whatever is in the beginning. That's what they're going to expect as being the issue for what follows. So if you don't put your stuff in there, then they're going to read on and say, wait a minute, I was expecting this was going to be the discussion. And now we're getting this other thing. I'm confused. This is incoherent. So what should the length of an issue position be? Well, that's a function of convention and the length of the entire unit. So you could think, if the issue position of a book is the introductory chapter, then, there are conventions about how long those should be. If the issue position is coming in a paragraph, then, it's probably going to be a sentence or two. As we can see here, issues of paragraphs are often more than one sentence. Because issues of paragraphs are often more than one sentence, we should reject the old notion of a topic sentence and replace it with the idea of an issue position. You should certainly remember, however, that if you're going to use an issue of more than one sentence, you must put your most important terms at the issue's end. Remember what we said before about the most important stuff coming at the end of a sentence? It also applies to the end of the issue position. The reader will create her expectations for the paragraph based not on the beginning of the issue, but on its end. If you put the wrong terms at the end of the issue, the reader will expect the wrong discussion. So again, this is all to help you to think about your writing and to diagnose its coherence. So we have that kind of issue and discussion structure that we need to follow in order to create expectations and fulfill them for the reader so that they experience our writing as coherent, that it hangs together. And they're happy when that happens, I can tell you. I'm sure any of you is a good reader. I'm a reader as well of much writing. And boy, I love it when expectations are created and then fulfilled. It makes reading, not frustrating, but a pleasure. Now, understandably, many writers cannot easily predict whether or not readers will find their prose coherent. We've seen the problem many times. The writer knows the text too well. To the writer, the text feels so coherent, they can't possibly predict where readers fail to perceive such coherence. The writer knows the controlling concept so well that she cannot imagine readers not understanding. So the easiest way to test for coherence is to identify the specific words in an issue position that the readers will take to be controlling. So we can call these themes. So go to your issue position of your writing and look for those specific words or themes that readers will think this is what this is going to be about, right? Then look through the discussion, whatever follows, to see if it contains language which readers can associate with the controlling theme. Those associated words are called a thematic string. Now, this is a lot of specialized language. Here is an example. And I'm just going to read this once, and then we'll diagnose it a couple of ways in a second. So other people besides the Arabs have used fire as a means of stopping rain. Thus, the Sulka of New Britain heats stones red hot in the fire and then put them out in the rain, or they throw hot ashes in the air. They think that the rain will soon cease to fall, for it does not like to be burned by the hot stones or ashes. The Telugas send a little girl naked into the rain with a burning piece of wood in her hand, which she is to show to the rain. That is supposed to stop the downpour. At Port Stephens in New South Wales, the medicine men used to drive away rain by throwing fire sticks into the air, while at the same time they puffed and shouted. Any man of the Aulna tribe in northern Australia can stop rain by simply warming a green stick in the fire and striking it against the wind. Hopefully, this seems coherent to you. Here is why. There are 3 different issues that come here in that first sentence. Other people besides Arabs have used fire as a means of stopping rain. So you can see in the discussion, right, if we think about issue discussion, that thing that has been emboldened at the top, other people besides Arabs, well, here they are. The Sulka of New Britain, they, the Telugas, the medicine men at Port Stevens, any man of the Alna tribe in Northern Australia. So you can see that a theme has been introduced in the issue section, issue position, and that it is repeated throughout. Same goes for fire. There's that term fire. It's a theme introduced, a term, and that is repeated throughout in different ways, right? Heat, red hot, fire, hot ashes, burned, burning, warming, fire sticks, fire. So same goes for stopping rain, right? Where we have rain, rain, cease, rain, stop downpour, drive away rain, stop rain. So here's an example of a good paragraph, a coherent paragraph. It has the issue position is in just that first sentence. It's introduced 3 kind of keywords or themes that then are repeated in the discussion. A reader, having been introduced to those themes and seeing them repeat, will consider this paragraph to be coherent. So here is how you can diagnose problems with issues. In other words, if you are looking at your own piece of writing and wanting to know whether it's coherent or not, first of all, draw a line between the issue and the discussion of the whole essay. If you cannot decide to draw the line or where to draw the line, you have a problem. Choose the most likely place and write a sentence to conclude the issue that contains the major concepts of your paper. If you have drawn a line in the middle of the paragraph, you should start a new paragraph where the discussion begins. So the first thing you want to be able to do is to divide your whole text into an issue section and a discussion section. And then once you've got your issue section, you can figure out, what are the themes? Are they introduced here? Are they on the page? And then are they in the discussion that follows? Then you can also divide the essay into its major sections and draw a line between the issue and discussion of that section. Again, if you have nothing that would count as an issue in each major section, you should create one. Okay, wait a second. Okay, so this is a way to diagnose whether you have any problems with issue and discussion. Again, this can be done at the level of a whole book or a whole essay, and then each section of that essay. And again, what are you doing? First of all, you're looking to see that there's a clear division for the reader to recognize, here's the issue, it's over, the discussion begins. And then you can look to see, have I introduced the most important, let's say, points or themes that I'll be talking about in the discussion? What are they? Can I find them? And then do they follow in the discussion or the rest of the essay or the rest of the section? Can I identify them? And if you can, then you are well on your way to coherence. Now, here is one of the things that I often give as tips on writing in just about every class, especially the lower division classes, because it's a really easy point to get about writing. And this is about paragraphs and points. And again, some specialized language here, a way of thinking about your writing that you probably haven't done before, but it's enormously useful, I can tell you. So most paragraphs, all sections and all texts should have a clear point. Points not only gauge readers, they are a crucial source of coherence. As readers work through a text, they try and make all those pieces fit together. However, they cannot possibly remember all of the information in all of the sentences. So writers provide them with a device that organizes the information into larger ideas, which the readers can remember, and which they can fit into the main idea of the text. This device is paragraphing. Paragraphs exist in order to make points, to organize information into paragraph-size points, and how the reader, show the reader, sorry about the typo there, show the reader how to relate those points to the text purpose. So the point is usually either the most important idea in the paragraph or its most general idea. So the main issue here is that paragraphs exist to make points. And this is something that helps to lead readers through a text, paragraph by paragraph, point by point. Readers will expect each paragraph to have a point, whether you want them to or not. If you give them a clear point, you fulfill their expectations and shape their thinking. If you don't give them a clear point, you will frustrate their expectations, which makes them angry, and you give up control. They may ignore the paragraph is disorganized, or they may construct their own point, and they almost always get it wrong. Right? So this is just another reiteration that readers are going to expect a clear point. And if they get it, they'll be happy. And if they don't, they'll be frustrated. And then they'll try and find and figure out what's the point of this paragraph. And if they're not given that point, then they'll be frustrated and probably get it wrong. So here is something that happens all the time. Even when I'm doing it myself and writing myself, I will know what the point of a paragraph is, but it may not necessarily be on the page. So a point is only a point if it appears on the page. Points do not matter if they exist only in your head. Readers do not have access to your head. Too many writers confuse the idea of, well, what I said was, with the idea of what I meant was. So when you ask the question, what's the point of this paragraph? The only answer that matters is a sentence on the paragraph or in the paragraph. If no sentence adequately states your point, then you haven't got a point. So this is just a really clear thing. If you're looking at your own writing, looking at a paragraph, ask yourself, what's the point of this paragraph? And then if it's not on the page, you should put it on the page. If it is on the page, then you're in good shape. Second big thing to think about or remember when it comes to a paragraph. So not only does it need to have a point, but everything in the paragraph or everything in the section or everything even in the text must relate to its point. Anything in a paragraph that does not contribute to the point undermines it. So this is just as an example, this is something I come across very often in student writing, and I don't think students realize this, is that I will get 2 pages of text with no paragraph breaks. So in other words, it is a 2-page paragraph. And if we're going by this, those 2-page paragraphs should have 1 point. Chances are, though, and this is often the case, there are multiple points in those 2 pages. But paragraphs help me as a reader and us as readers to know and to look for a point and then to exclude or expect then that the other information in that paragraph will just be around that 1 point, right? So that's what we expect. So a sentence that does not have a bearing on the point confuses the reader and will lead them to misunderstand your point. Now I know sometimes there's a bit of information that we just love and we want to stick it in that paragraph. But the flash of wit unrelated to the point, the brilliant digression, is rarely worth the damage it does. If unrelated information is not important, you should throw it out. If it's important, then change the point to accommodate it or give it its own paragraph. So this is something that I'll often say when I'm giving feedback on student writing, and I'll say, this paragraph seems to have multiple points embedded within it. I don't know exactly what they are because I'm not in your head, but I can see that this information doesn't fit what I thought the point was, or there seems to be 2 points here, and I'm not sure how to interpret the information that's provided. So when you go and you diagnose your own writing, you look at your paragraph, first say, can I identify the point of this paragraph? It's this. If you've got 2 points in that paragraph, well, create a second paragraph for the second point. Then you go through your paragraph and say, does everything in here relate to that point? If it does, you're golden. If it doesn't, then you either need to throw it out, you need to rewrite your point to accommodate that because you think it's important, or it belongs with a new point in a new paragraph. So, where do readers expect to find point sentences? And here we come to a convenient conjunction of issues and points. Where we talked about that issue discussion structure, well, we're going to revisit it now. The reader always assumes that the main concepts announced in the issue of the paragraph will be the key concepts developed in the rest of the paragraph. So the issue creates the reader's expectations. The paragraph's coherence depends upon whether its discussion fulfills the expectations. So the point is the most important thing a paragraph has to say. It should also certainly contain the paragraph's key concepts.
Oh, I can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. I hit the mute button for a moment and needed to hit it again. The easiest way to create the right expectation for the paragraph is to put the point into the issue. These are called point-first paragraphs. If you're going to put the point in the issue, remember that as much as possible, the point should appear at the end of the issue. The stress position, right? Now, there are, of course, point-last paragraphs, but they're much riskier. And why are they riskier? Because readers will be looking for points at the beginning of paragraphs. And if they don't get it, then they may be confused. But of course, we've all read good writing where the point is at the end. So the writer has led you along before kind of hitting you with the main point. But it's more of a kind of unfolding, and they're still creating expectations that you are being led towards a point, but it's a little bit more complex. It's much easier to just hit the point right at the beginning of the paragraph. Now, points exist at every level of a text, larger than a sentence. The text is a whole, chapters, sections, and paragraphs. For units smaller than a complete text, points also support the point of the larger unit. What does that mean? That means that, let's say you're reading a book, and the book lays out in the issue position, i.e. the introduction, a series of themes and has usually one or two main arguments. And then the chapter, if it's done well, will repeat those themes, and it will have all of its own little points, but it will relate back to the main point of the book. So books that do this well, each section, like let's say a paragraph, will have a point, and all of those paragraphs' points will back up the point of, let's say, a chapter, and the chapter's points will back up the main point of the book, right? This is about producing coherence. So how do we diagnose potential problems with points? For the entire essay, locate one sentence or two consecutive sentences that you could send as, let's say, the telegram of your paper or your text's main point. The sentence should not be a sentence that merely announces what you intend to write about or the plan of the paper. Neither of those sentences could count as points. So here's an example. In this paper, I will discuss the influence of mothers in the development of anorexia nervosa. First, I'll review recent literature, then critique the different theories of the role of mothers, and finally, I will suggest a reconciliation among conflicting theories. So the first sentence only announces the subject matter. The second announces the plan of the paper. The text point of the paper would be one or two sentences that encapsulates the reconciliation among the theories, right? Which is what's announced at the end there. So those two sentences don't have the point of the text. So don't mistake a plan or the subject matter to be the point. Okay. So we've talked about clarity at the beginning. Verbs should express the most important actions of a sentence should be in the verbs or in verb form. And then we talked about the the core, right? That verb-subject agreement coming close and relatively early in a sentence. And we talked about the importance of connectors and of orienters to help shape the clarity of your writing and lead the reader in the way you want to lead them. Then we talked about old and new, which is also about kind of coherence and clarity. And then we talked about the issue discussion structure, which is about coherence. So, right, if the first ones were more about clarity, the second ideas that we talked about were about coherence, things that hang together. A reader reads it, you have created expectations and fulfilled them. You've announced the issue and then discussed it. And we gave some examples or some language to talk about, and also a new way to think about the work of paragraphs. They exist to make points, and everything in that paragraph should relate to just the one point of that paragraph. And have some ways to diagnose whether or not our paragraphs have points or our sections have points, and therefore a way to diagnose the way in which a reader might experience our writing. Is it coherent? Is it not? Now we're moving on to the kind of third thing, and that has to do with persuasion. So if you remember at the very beginning, I said I have 3 assumptions: that you would like your writing to be clear, that you would like it to be coherent, and that you would like it to be persuasive. So this section is part of a larger one about making arguments. Much of the writing that you do in your classes contains arguments, but much of it does not. Thus, I'm only going to include the pieces of the section that pertain to both. This section of the kind of presentation is about being able to address the need that writers have to persuade readers to agree with their points. So if we think about text in terms of coherence, in the introduction we have a point. In the body of the text, we have paragraph points thematically linked to the main point, right? We talked about that. And the paragraph discussions thematically linked to the paragraph points, right? So we have introduction and body of the text broken down into paragraphs. So if we think about text in terms of argument, in the introduction, we have a main claim. At the paragraph level, we have claims that support the main claim, and within each paragraph, we have support for the paragraph claims. Okay, here's an example. Always easier with examples. So here's a simple argument at the paragraph level. We have reason to believe that dentistry in ancient Mesopotamia was fairly sophisticated, for Mesopotamian cuneiform texts mention an astonishing array of dental and anomalies. For instance, quote, "If his teeth are gathered, he will die," end quote, probably refers to dental crowding, such as that seen in cases of pituitary dwarfism. Bad position of the teeth has also been noted, especially because of its result, a bad bite. For example, quote, "Your bite is completely slanting," end quote. Abnormal dental coloration is present too in our textual evidence. We find this anomaly in medical texts where the practitioner intends to heal the abnormal coloration, either yellowish or black or dark, using various medical prescriptions, and so on. Okay, that's a simple argument. So what's the claim in that text? The claim is ancient Mesopotamian dentistry was fairly sophisticated. Readers say, okay, why should I agree with that? The writer responds, I will provide some reasons. One reason to agree with my claim is that, quote, Mesopotamian cuneiform texts mention an astonishing array of dental anomalies. Readers, they do? Where? Show me some evidence to back up your reason. Writer's evidence, boom, there it is. So, in fields like sociocultural anthropology, many claims are supported by raw data in the form of quotations from other texts. But the raw data cannot support the claim by itself. Readers need reasons to help them understand what they're supposed to make of the quotation. Here's another example. Hamlet most clearly shows his lack of Christian values when he plots revenge against his stepfather, Claudius. That's the claim, all by itself. And then we have a claim plus some evidence. Hamlet most clearly shows his lack of Christian values when he plots revenge against his stepfather, Claudius. There's the claim. And then here's a quote from Hamlet. That's the evidence. And now might I do it, Pat. Now he is praying, now I'll do it. And so he goes to heaven, and so I'm revenged. That would be scanned. A villain kills my father, and for that I, his sole son, do the same villain send to heaven. Why? This is higher in salary, not revenge, right? So we have the claim, and we have the evidence. But we need a reason to help the reader understand how the evidence is evidence for the claim. And that means giving a reason. And here it is. Hamlet most clearly shows his lack of Christian values when he plots revenge against his stepfather Claudius. There's your claim. When he had the opportunity to kill Claudius while Claudius was praying, Hamlet chose not to, because if he killed Claudius, then he too would send him to heaven and wanted to send him to hell as an act of revenge. So that's the reason, and then comes the evidence. So many writers assume that the grounds for their claims live in the data. To persuade readers that their claims are correct, they simply present their data. But readers often find such data dumping arguments difficult to follow because they can't easily locate the significant parts of the data that led the writer to make the claim. Data dumping arguments become much clearer when the writer adds a sentence or two before the data that interprets it or summarizes it, therefore providing an intervening reason to support the claim. So here's a good way to think about this. Reasons are beliefs about the world that we cite in support of our claim. Evidence is the raw data that supports the reason. Reasons sit on evidence, evidence sits on itself. So you may have experienced this in writing something and getting feedback, which says, you're like, I made my claim and I supported it with quotes from the text, but still it didn't seem the reader, in this case, the professor, or maybe one of you fellow co-students didn't understand the relationship between the evidence and the claim. And that is because you need a reason. Okay, we are doing very well time-wise here. So that is just about persuasion, right? How do you persuade somebody to agree with you? Well, obviously you make a claim or an argument. You need to back it up, right? With evidence. But then you need a reason to help interpret that evidence for the reader to show how it relates to the claim. And one last thing in this area of persuasion, for those who care. How does a reason justify a claim? It does so with something we might call a warrant. It's a very kind of imprecise term, but here it is. So if we go back to our example of Mesopotamian dentistry, the reason, right, so the claim was ancient Mesopotamian dentistry was fairly sophisticated. The reason given is that Mesopotamian cuneiform texts mention an astonishing array of dental anomalies. The implied link between those two is called the warrant. And the warrant is something like, if a society's texts mention a wide array of dental anomalies, we can assume that the state of dentistry in that society was fairly sophisticated. So the question becomes, will readers agree? If they will, then the argument can proceed as is. If not, the writer needs to introduce another level of argument that articulates the warrant and defends it. I know this is a level of sophistication. Don't worry about it too much, but it is to say that sometimes we make claims or we read them, right? You read something and you go, okay, there's a claim. Why should I believe that claim? Well, here's the reason. And here's evidence that supports the reason. But if you don't agree with the reason, then the person's claim is not going to be, you're not going to be persuaded of their claim. So sometimes you have to do two levels of persuasion, right? The first one is claim, and here's the reason. But then the second one is, and here's why this reason justifies my claim. It's different than evidence. Don't worry about that too much. It's a level of sophistication that maybe is not worthwhile. We're thinking about too much. But it's just to say that sometimes you may have all three pieces together, right? A claim, a reason that justifies your claim, and then evidence that backs up your reason to justify your claim. But still someone might disagree with you. They might not be persuaded. And usually it can come as, I don't think that's evidence that backs up the reason, or they might say, I don't think your reason is sound. Anyway, don't worry too much about that, but it is just to kind of note that there is something else going on there. Okay. So this is the point at which we kind of close up the section of the presentation that has to do with writing persuasive academic writing. I want to say one or two more things, and then I'm going to turn to just a few observations about writing for the public. Thus far, I've been talking largely about writing academic, or we might think of also as kind of professional writing. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that with each, so if what we're doing is trying to imagine how our writing is experienced by readers, then we need to know our readers. And most of what I've told you here is largely just about any kind of reader reading nonfiction. Also probably some fiction as well. But how you come out with some of these things is going to matter on who you're writing for. So if you're writing for an academic audience, a professor, if you go on and you're writing for, let's say, if you stick within the field of anthropology, you're writing for other anthropologists, archaeologists, etc., then you know what your readers are expecting, both in terms of like what they care about. And here's then a set of principles to write clear, coherent, persuasive writing that will persuade them to care about what you're doing. But usually what you're doing, and by now if you are, reaching the end of your undergraduate career, then you've begun to learn to recognize what a piece of sociocultural anthropology writing looks like, what a piece of archaeology writing looks like, what a piece of forensic anthropology or bio writing looks like. And those will be conventions, right, that kind of fit. Everything that I've said here should help you regardless of what those are, but it's still, you're writing for specialized audiences. What we're going to talk about next is writing for a public audience. And, it's just a few kind of observations. Again, this is based upon people. I took a couple of workshops, and this is what I've distilled from the workshop about writing for the public. Again, it was imagined as writing for the public from the perspective as somebody who is maybe an expert or in a certain subject matter. Right. So this is about, if you are an anthropologist or a scholar of some sort, and you want to engage the public with some piece of your expertise, how are the best ways to do that? Right. So thinking about op-eds, thinking about articles written for a public audience, everything that's talked about before matters to that. But this is kind of additional points. So writing for the public. And, we're all members of the public as well as being academics of one sort or another, or students, right? So this should be familiar, although maybe you don't tend to think about yourself in these terms. But readers out there are looking to be moved, enlightened, entertained, or challenged. In other words, how do you get a reader to care about your writing? Well, you have to understand that we're all busy. And if we're going to take time out of our busyness, then it's going to be because we're looking for something. We're looking, again, to be moved, to be challenged, to be entertained, or enlightened. So what are the key elements that grab the attention and hold the attention of readers? Well, usually it is, and these are some key points just from storytelling and generally, there's drama involved, or friction, or conflict of some sort. Now, one of the interesting points made at the last workshop that I was in about effective communication said that to effectively communicate something, grab the attention of readers, especially kind of from the more general public, it's 20% of it is about what you know. And 80% of it is how you feel about what you know. So we as readers are reading something and we are reading, and what communicates to us? Well, there's some facts there, or there's some details, there's some information, but these people who were giving the workshop said the way you draw out something is in the human element of the story, putting a face of on anthropology, anthropological knowledge, but basically generating feelings in readers to care in some degree about what you're writing. So again, that effective communication is to some degree about facts, but a lot of it is also about how you feel about those facts. And so they were saying in this workshop, it was really interesting that they believe that if you want to communicate effectively, you have to appeal as much to, let's say, the heart as to the head. You can think about that, see if that resonates with you or not. It was something I'm still thinking about. I'm not sure whether I completely agree with that, but they wouldn't say it if they didn't have reasons to say it. And so I thought I would pass that along. Now, here's something that they said. Remove jargon from your writing unless it's absolutely necessary. Now, what do we mean by jargon here? Sometimes jargon is used in a negative or pejorative term. I'm not using it in that way. You may hear my cat. Yeah, Tatu, I know. I'll get to you later. Yeah. Jargon I'm using here in a neutral term to mean just specialized language. And you know what that is. You know it immediately. If you don't know what the specialized language is, you can immediately recognize like, okay, that is part of a conversation or a specialized group that I don't know anything about. So you can diagnose in your own writing, is there jargon? Is there specialized language? Do I need it to communicate what I want to communicate? If you don't, then take it out. I know that we get attached to certain kinds of terms and ways of talking. I do too. I think this concept perfectly captures this thing. But you know what? Someone else, it's gonna create a stumbling block for them. They're gonna stumble over that because they don't understand it. And you don't want to create stumbling blocks for your readers. So if it's absolutely necessary, by all means, keep it in. Make sure you explain it well. But if you can say it in a different way without that specialized language for the general public, you probably should. This is not a dumbing down, though, right? The key is to capture the complexity and guide the reader through whatever you're writing without losing them. Too much jargon you'll lose the reader, right? So this shouldn't be thought of as a dumbing down. It is just about capturing and maintaining the complexity while guiding the reader through it. And here was an example that I'm taking from one of the workshops I was in. And it was basically, they gave us this, this description of a baseball report. And they said, can you look at this description of a baseball game? And can you explain from the basis of that paragraph all of the rules and the logic that you need to make sense of that? And can you do it in a minute or two? Or, and after we started trying to do that, they said, stop. Do you need to know all of those rules and all of that logic in order to capture the drama and the sense of how and why to care about it? This is, again, just a way of thinking about our own rules and logic and theories and concepts and categories and frameworks that we use to explain something in the world that we're interested in. And this was a way for them to say, is there a simple way to communicate how and why a reader should care about it that doesn't require all the sophisticated kind of architecture that we have that we use when we're talking to other specialists in our field. And if there is, and chances are there almost always is, then go with that when writing. So again, it's just a way to kind of look at our own writing and say, do I need all of this kind of detail and all of these rules and explication to make the point about why readers should care? What's interesting and fascinating about this? If I don't need it, then I can take it out and create a way for them to grasp what matters and why. So here are some elements to think about, again, when writing for the general public. That one of the things that I said earlier, or kind of mentioned to you earlier, is that readers are effectively communicated to when they come to care about something, right? When they feel something for what they're reading. Again, that could be, could be to entertain, to enlighten, to challenge. And so what makes people do that? Usually some sort of drama or friction or conflict. And we tend to care about issues when there's a human face on them. And so if we do that, then one of the kind of tropes of storytelling is a hero on a difficult journey. Just think about, the issue. There's so many different ways in which we can think about how that kind of basic trope in our kind of Western culture is one that we just see repeated everywhere. It's one that readers recognize and they'll respond to. Other forms of drama, friction, or conflict are romance, seduction, humor, mystery, strange and exotic, not in a negative sense, but in a kind of unexpected sense, characters, villains and heroes. My daughter, my 10-year-old daughter, often I'll be reading something and she'll want to know, is that a good person or a bad person? Is that a good guy or a bad guy? Is that good or bad? In other words, she still has very much this kind of moral sensibility that she wants to orient how she's supposed to interpret something through these key categories. And those don't really go away when we get older. We are looking to kind of interpret what it is we're reading. And we often do that through things like villains or heroes. Flawed characters are more interesting. And again, when I say character here, I'm not talking about fiction. I'm just talking about the people that populate the story that you're telling. Again, what are some forms that drama, friction, or conflict come in? So impossible obstacles to overcome, conflict itself, peril. You can build or escalate hardship. And then, so in other words, if you are drawing in a reader, you're describing, let's say a problem or a challenge in the world. It could be a public health challenge. It could be a political challenge. It could be a social one. It could be a psychological issue. You're kind of saying, here's a problem in the world, and how are we going to respond to that problem? How are we going to overcome it? Aha. If this was, if you were doing it as an anthropologist, you would say, anthropological knowledge. I've got this bit for my research that will promise some sort of resolution to the drama, the friction, the conflict that I've drawn you in with and written about. So again, it's kind of a way to think about what you do for readers is you draw them in with the promise of, drama, friction, conflict, hardships. You create something that they care about, and that is, we might think of as a problem that requires a solution. How are we going to respond to this challenge? You bring in your anthropology or your data, your research, and it will promise a resolution. And readers will then want to, in caring about the problem, will therefore continue to read on. Last point maybe here is just, it's often effective, let's put it that way, to tell things in your own words, in your own way. I'm sure we've all read things where somebody doesn't seem to be telling a story in a way that feels authentic. It seems like they're using words or concepts that just don't fit for some reason to either the story or who they are, etc. So telling things in your own words, in your own way, is always a great way to connect with readers. Now, this is just kind of my last thing, and we're right on time here. Okay, last thing. If you actually wanted to pitch somebody something, let's say you wanted to write an op-ed, there's something that's come up in the news and your research speaks to it, and you've got something to say to the general public because there's a public issue, something in the news, and I want to write something about that. How do you pitch? In other words, how do you go and say to the editor of X publication, I've got something for you? Well, here's what you would want that pitch to include. You could, of course, send them what you've already written. That's one way to go about it. Or if you don't want to go to all the trouble of writing something to get it rejected, potentially, here's a way to do it. Editors usually are looking for stories, right? So there should be a story arc in your pitch. I'm going to tell you a story about this, or here's what I want to describe to you. You should give a sense of the discovery or research findings, what the triggering question or problem was. You would want to include in your pitch an answer to the question of why now. In other words, the news has been dominated for the last 2 weeks by a discussion of unexpected X, Y, and Z, or this problem. So I'm speaking to that. That's the why now question. Social relevance. Why does it matter? It matters because people care about this thing, right? And then you'd also want to say, why is this publication the right place for the thing you're proposing to write? And then something about why you're the right person to do it. Usually something about your expertise or your experience. So anyway, those last little bits are just more some kind of tips about how to think and going forward. Some of you are graduating, and you might be going out to write for a more public audience in whatever it is that you do. And those are some useful tips there. I think that is it for me. That was a lot, I know. I know it's a lot. I'm sorry, but I wanted to pack it all in, and I managed to do it.